All right. Well, I'm pleased to welcome your Seattle 4 Rotary President-elect, Jimmy Collins, to the podium. Jimmy is a principal with Jimmy Collins and Associates. The firm is engaged in leadership and business consulting with executives in business, government, and nonprofit organizations. Clients have included CEOs, boards of directors, executive directors, philanthropists, and city managers for large urban communities. His executive development was gained in corporate, military, and community settings. He's had more than 2 decades in management for Weyerhaeuser, where he finished as vice president. Other commercial competencies were developed in large and small businesses, including AT&T and real estate brokerage. He's also held military officer positions in the U.S. Army, accumulating as a major general. Really impressive, Jimmy. Thanks. Please come to the podium to kick off our long program.
Thank you very much, President Jeff. Today, we're privileged to welcome back to our podium our own Secretary of State, Kim Wyman. Kim has presented me with 4 fast facts that I want to share with you. She's the 15th Secretary of State for Washington. She's only the 2nd woman to hold the position. She was the Thurston County Auditor from 2001 to 2013, giving her over a decade of experience wrestling with voting issues at the county level. So she knows this business in depth. You may recall from when I introduced her last time that she's a cancer survivor and joins many others in the audience, I'm sure. I'd add 2 additional fast facts about Kim Wyman that I think are particularly important. She's a former Army spouse, so she knows the teamwork that's required in the military family. Kim and her husband, John, came to Washington when they were reassigned to the 2nd Ranger Battalion at what we then called Fort Lewis after they'd spent some time in Ansbach, Germany. So, Seema, you and Kim might have an opportunity to speak German in the chat room if Kim can read while she speaks. You know, my wife and I have observed Kim in action, most recently on national TV, where she acquitted herself well, explaining to the reporter how the state of Washington protects citizens' votes and adding confidence. And that just reminds me why it's so important that we hear from her on a periodic basis. So please join me in welcoming our Secretary of State, Kim Wyman.
Well, thank you, General. That was a very lovely introduction, and no, my German not good. Das is not good, but it is really good to see all of you today, and I appreciate you inviting me to share a little bit of an update on what's happening with elections as we go into the final 34 days of the election cycle. It can't get here fast enough from my perspective, but I know the last time I spoke to this group, we talked a lot about cybersecurity, so I want to update you on that and share with you kind of where we're at. And I'm going to do PowerPoint here, so bear with me as I do this. But I guess I want to start with the perspective for each of you that this is my 7th presidential election to oversee and be a part of as an administrator, and almost bumping up on 28 years of doing this work. And in that entire time, I have never seen anything like the election that we find ourselves in here from an administrator's point of view. So the anxiety that you may be feeling possibly from last night's presentation on television, or maybe just the social media exchanges that are happening for all of us, or just having conversations with your friends and family. Know we're in this together, because I think every American is feeling the same way. And we're going to do this together by presenting facts and talking through it and sharing information like this. So Let me just start with, I think the same slide I started with the last time I spoke with your group. Certainly top of mind going into this election last December, if you had asked me what I was most concerned about in 2020, it would hands down be cybersecurity. And you know, I'm really happy to tell you that, and again, I think these were slides I shared with you a year or so ago when I visited you last, but the strength of our election system is the decentralization of it. The fact that we have over 10,000 election officials that are like me, who are either appointed or elected, that take oaths of office to uphold their state constitutions and their state laws, as well as the US Constitution and the federal laws that govern elections. And you know, no single person or group has all the power. Now, I would add an asterisk to this slide now, a couple of years later, that it's also one of the challenges of our system because of this decentralization. It's harder for us to be unified in how we talk about elections, and it gets confusing for voters. And from a cybersecurity perspective, it's also a challenge. But let me give you the positives first. Here in Washington, it's no exception. We have a decentralized system with our 39 county auditors' offices and in King County Election Division that are headed by elected officials who answer to their voters. They oversee the actual tabulation or counting of ballots, their local election management systems, and technology that they use to really provide these services like ballot sorting systems, their web pages, and that type of thing. The responsibility of the Secretary of State's office is over the whole state. So I serve as the Chief Election Officer for Washington, and we oversee a statewide voter registration and election management system that we call VoteWA. I think that we talked about this last year, and I'm looking and I pulled the wrong slide, doggone it. This system combined the information system that's listed there, but VoteWA has had a lot of coverage in the last 18 months or so, but it has really helped strengthen our cybersecurity position, and I'm really proud of it. And it's also enabled us to allow the state election officers to communicate in ways that we couldn't do even a year ago. We have a certification and training program for our election officials, and the state certifies the tabulation system. So just as a refresher, if you haven't been able to see any of my presentations on vote by mail, our state evolved to vote by mail over really about a 20-year period of time or more, depending on the county. We started in the early 1990s with allowing any voter to become a permanent absentee voter. This became wildly popular, and by the late 1990s, 60% of our voters were choosing to vote by mail every election with an absentee ballot. And then many of you will remember, as I do, the governor's race in 2004, which was the closest election for governor in the country's history. And out of that, that was our last time being a full poll site state. And we had problems both at the polling place and with our absentee ballots because we were running two separate elections simultaneously and didn't have the resources to do both well. So in 2005, the legislature allowed counties to move to vote by mail elections entirely. Most of the state moved there immediately, and it took two counties a few more years to gear up their processing, and in Pierce County's case, it was to gear up the political will to be told to vote by mail. So in 2011, Washington State became a completely vote by mail state. So I give you that background because it leads into where we are today. You all have heard in 2016 that all 50 states were scanned by Russian actors trying to get into our election system. And out of that, in 2017, before leaving office, Jay Johnson, who was the Director of Homeland Security, along with President Obama, designated elections as part of the United States critical infrastructure. So what this means is that elections have the same security threat level as the power grid. as water systems, as all of the systems that really keep our country going. And this has really changed the game of how we operate here in Washington State. And quite frankly, a lot of the things I'm going to talk about with Washington, the same things are happening in the other 50 states as well, including the District of Columbia. So first and foremost, we have been able to build partnerships unlike what we had in 2016 with federal partners like Homeland Security and the FBI, but also here in Washington State with our own Chief Information Officer and Chief Information Security Officer. But the one I'm most proud of, I can't lie, is the relationship that we fostered with our own Washington National Guard. And of course the State Auditor's Office. But the Washington National Guard, I'll come back to in a moment. One of the things I draw your attention to here at this slide is that we created the first in the country election cybersecurity unit that we call the Elections Security Operations Center, or SOC. And what this has allowed us to do with federal money that we received from Congress back in 2017, 2018, is to hire our own Chief Information Officer and a team of really crack security, cybersecurity experts. And what I realized when we were building VoteWA in partnership with our 39 counties is that each county has varying degrees of IT technical support. So a big county like King County, no problem. They have their own IT unit in the elections division. The further out you get from King County, especially when you get into those medium and smaller size counties, they're lucky if they have an IT person in the county, let alone embedded in their election office. So what we wanted to do with cybersecurity was build a unit that could support not only our statewide VoteWA system, but also help protect and defend the county election systems that we're now connected to. So we've reinforced the infrastructure of our firewalls and our monitoring systems. And we really have spent a lot of time testing those systems with our federal partners and our state partners, but also doing training for our staff and for the county staff. Because I think all of us are aware that all of this technology that we have, our phones, our computers, our tablets, we're all vulnerable. And quite honestly, the biggest vulnerability is us as the users. So we spend a lot of time reminding people not to click on email attachments or links in email, because that's one of the most common ways the bad actors inject malware into your systems. The other thing that we've done since 2016 that I'm really proud of is we've created continuity of operation plans, or COOP plans. And these have really guided us during events like, hypothetically speaking, a pandemic or a natural disaster or a wildfire, and of course with cybersecurity. So we're using these to guide us in navigating these circumstances that may come in the middle of an election, because election officials are planners. We started planning for this election 2 years ago here in Washington. Finally, the other thing we're doing in the cybersecurity realm is conducting tabletop exercises with either our federal partners. My elections director and team and I have been on a number of nationwide tabletop exercises with CISA, the cybersecurity arm of Department of Homeland Security, and our partners across the country in Secretary of State's offices. But we've also done those in partnership with our National Guard here in Washington State, and that's actually what that picture is of a tabletop exercise that we did a few years ago. So apparently that wasn't enough. Cybersecurity was not enough of a challenge in 2020. We had to throw in a global pandemic, civil unrest, reorganizing the Postal Service, and maybe a hurricane and a couple wildfires. So this suddenly put us here in Washington on the national stage because of COVID-19 and our experience with vote-by-mail elections. So I want to talk a little bit about what our experience just this year has been here in Washington. I think you might remember back in March, which feels like 10 years ago, we were conducting our presidential primary, and we were tracking to have 59 to 60% turnout in that primary on the weekend going into the election. And if you remember, that's when Kirkland had the first outbreak of COVID-19 cases in the country. And so we did see a precipitous drop in our return ballots on the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of election week. Wednesday because we're a postmark state. And you started to see a domino effect across the country. Presidential primaries and primary elections were canceled or postponed. And suddenly we became the authorities on vote by mail, or we might have already been the authorities on vote by mail, but we started getting a lot of inquiries from our partners across the country and working really closely with them. I'm going to go back to that slide. We have been giving advice, sharing our policies and procedures, and really trying to help states across the country adapt to COVID-19, making their polling places more accessible and expanding their absentee ballot access, or in some cases, completely moving to vote by mail elections. So apparently, even that wasn't enough. So yeah, this is how my day begins frequently in this COVID-19 pandemic era of elections. And it's not limited to the president. I think we're all aware that the discussions about our upcoming election are bipartisan. The attacks on every element of our system are coming from both the left and the right. And I appreciate Jane's comments when we first started this, this meeting, because let's face it, we're all looking at this election from our partisan glasses, and it's hard not to respond to that. So let me share with you what you need to know right now. When we think about the last 6 months, and when I was looking forward to this election, people started asking us if we should just completely move over to vote by mail elections as a nation. And I was really hesitant to say yes, because I knew what it took for Washington to build out our system. It took us years to do that. It took a lot of investment of resources and time and energy to make good controls and processes and get equipment and technology to help us do that. And I knew that election offices across the country didn't have the time that we did. And the only way you can make up for that time is putting a lot of money into it. In fact, the Brennan Center and the Bipartisan Center in Washington, D.C., Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington, D.C., estimated that to convert our entire country over to vote by mail elections for this election would take an investment of between $2 and $4 billion. And unfortunately, all of the discussion in Congress and in the White House about the merits of vote by mail elections really torpedoed that effort. And this was a bipartisan effort, because on the left, you had calls for universal vote by mail. And if we don't completely allow every voter to vote by mail, there will be widespread voter suppression. And on the right, the calls were, if you transfer over to vote by mail elections, we're going to have massive fraud, vote rigging, all of that. And I think in the beginning, both sides were trying to stake out their turf for negotiations on all of these bills, because initially back in April, they provided us $400 million worth of money to deal with COVID-19. Unfortunately, those conversations broke down. The two camps stayed in their corners, and unfortunately, the people who suffered are the voters, because we did not get the infusion of money that we needed to be able to really adapt the systems in the robust way we could have. So here we are. And these are pictures of what we're facing kind of in November. The vote centers that you see in the top two pictures are actually in Kentucky in their primary election. They have done a model that many states have gone to of making really big consolidated vote by mail, or excuse me, voting centers and polling places, and giving that social distance for workers and voters. And this is one solution. There is no perfect or best solution, because all of us are going to have in-person voting, and all of us are going to have absentee or vote by mail voting. As you can see in the picture of the gentleman using a device to mark his ballot, we still have a need for people to vote in person. So these hybrid models that each state are coming up with vary, and it really depends on the state on what they're going to look like. So we're all working very hard to make sure we have safe voting for all of our voters, regardless of whether they choose to vote in person or vote at home, or vote at the polls. So there are some lessons from our primary election we just had in August that I want to share with you, because I think they really do set up what's going to happen in the next 35 to 40 days. First of all, we saw a trend in Washington State that was exaggerated in a way that I've not seen in previous elections. So you look at this graph that I have on the screen, and you'll notice that in the final 5 days of voting, or the voting period here in Washington, the Monday through Friday of election week, we see a real spike in return of ballots. And this is on Wednesday and Thursday because Washington accepts a postmark on or before Election Day as a valid return of that ballot. So as long as the voter gets that postmark and we receive that ballot between that day, Election Day and 20 days after, we can count those ballots. And I think that's a voter empowerment element of Washington State. But you can see 60% of our ballots came in election week. So while our counties are going to work very hard to process ballots and get them processed as quickly and efficiently and accurately as possible, it is just a throughput issue. So in our primary, we processed 1.8 million ballots in 7 days. We had the highest turnout in a primary election since 1950 something, excuse me, well, it's been a long time. I can't remember 64, there we go, since 1964. So that was 55% turnout. We are expecting close to 90% turnout statewide, which means we're going to need to process between 2 and 2.8 million ballots in that same time period. So we're ready. We're working on that. Counties are working very hard to get ready for that. But I want to give you that national perspective. So when you hear all of this conversation about vote by mail and absentee voting, you can have a better perspective. This graphic is from the New York Times. And if you look at the states that are in that darker blue are the states that are planning on doing a vote by mail election where they are going to preemptively mail a ballot to every registered eligible voter. We're not mailing them willy-nilly. There aren't millions of ballots going out to nobody. These are being mailed to voters who are registered to vote and eligible to participate. So we have 5 states that have done this for a long time, like Washington, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Utah, and Hawaii. But we are adding 4 states to that mix, California, New Jersey, Vermont, and Nevada. I apologize, I missed that on this slide, and also the District of Columbia. So 10 states are going to be vote by mail states. You'll notice the states in gold. These states are states that still have some sort of excuse required to vote an absentee ballot. So the voter has to preemptively do something to get a ballot, and there's a defined set of circumstances that will allow them to get the ballot. And the remaining states are states that have really expanded their access to absentee voting laws that they already had on the books and are going to see tremendous turnout in absentee voting across the country. So the last thing I will leave you with is that I anticipate in the next 34 days, we're going to see a lot of information thrown around about voting and elections. And some of it is going to be accurate. Some of it is going to be misinformation, which is just stuff that is wrong and gets shared on social media or on a news report. And then some of it is going to be disinformation. And the difference between misinformation and disinformation is that misinformation is usually just us making a mistake. You know, our friend on Facebook had this posting and we forwarded it on to our social media and found out it was wrong. Disinformation is that same activity, but the idea is to change the political outcome. It is to change the political construct. And so what I want to get on your radar is that on a national level, secretaries of state across the country and election directors across the country are working to provide information that you can believe and trust. And the hashtag, as you can see, is TrustedInfo2020. The idea is to direct people to government sites, media sites that are trusted sources of information. So just because you see it on the internet doesn't mean it's real. I know that'll shock all of you. But one of the things you can do right now is check your information by going on to votewa.gov. Make sure we have your correct address for voting purposes so we can give you the right ballot the first time at the right address. And if you have any questions, I encourage you to check with your local elections office or the Secretary of State's office, and you can see our information below. So with that, I am happy to take questions.
Thank you, Kim. Fantastic, as always. Welcome back. We have a slew of questions, so we've got like 18 minutes to get through these if we can. And I know they're going to
be answers. We can do this. Okay.
All right. So the first question is, has the recent change in leadership of the USPS and the decommissioning of major processing equipment placed VBM at risk, either in Washington or nationally?
I'll talk about both, but let me first talk about Washington because I think you all have a higher interest in that answer. Certainly, we have been concerned by the changes that were being implemented earlier this year in the summer, where 3 postal facilities, the Wenatchee facility, the Yakima facility, and the Tacoma facility, where they do a lot of processing, had machines that were either taken out of commission or completely disassembled and removed from their facilities. We heard reports of overtime being reduced, reports in terms of how trucks could leave the facilities were being handled. And as election officials, I received as a state election official, a letter from the attorney for the USPS letting us know, reminding us of what the delivery times for mail processing was. Here in Washington State, we mail out our main bulk of the 4.8 million ballots that we're going to send in a couple of weeks at what we call a at a bulk rate, mailing rate for nonprofit. And this means we save a tremendous amount of money in mailing, but the standard delivery time is between 3 and 10 days. So we immediately got on the phone with our partners here in Washington State at the USPS. We have a long-standing relationship with them. We work with them very closely during an election, and they set up the next business day a phone call with not only them, their representation, but national representation and all of our county auditors. And we had a very frank conversation. We got into the weeds and asked tough questions and felt that we were fine because we mail out ballots 18 days before election day. So even at that upper end of 10 days, our voters would still have time to return ballots. That still wasn't enough for me. So what we did also, because I have rulemaking authority, the Washington Administrative Code, we put in an emergency rule that requires all counties to mail ballots 15 days before election day or earlier to mail out at a first class rate. So that actually is going to give us between 3 and 5 days of delivery time for those ballots that are mailed out after that first initial mailing. Now I say all of this because those are variables we can control. Now, you may be aware that Attorney General Ferguson filed a lawsuit in district court with a number of other states. I did not join in that case. That's becoming really political, and it's not because I was trying to be political in any way. I didn't join in that because I didn't think that the ruling that what they could do in court would have a big impact on Washington voters. I thought that we had that well in hand, but I knew that the Attorney General was very capable of making the arguments in court, and the state would benefit from that action. I thought it was more important to focus on the things we could control. So we've done that here in Washington State. So I have a high confidence level. We're going to be getting our ballots on time. You'll be receiving your ballots on time. And I know this because the county election officials have been working very hard to get their mailing out. On a national level, you're seeing very similar threads where election officials are working closely with their local USPS postmasters and with their state officials. So we're working very hard to ensure that and really trying to do it in an administrative way. It's difficult when you take administrative processes like getting ballots to voters and delivering the mail, and you start politicizing them on either side of the aisle. So we're trying to navigate those waters and really focus on what we can control so that you can get a ballot and have time to vote it.
Okay, next question. Do I understand correctly that you are recommending your position become non-partisan? And this question's come up a couple of times. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it came off of an interview question. I can't remember if it was a debate or an editorial board, but one of the things that I think many of you have heard me say is that I wonder why some of our executive offices, like county coroner, not in King County, it's a medical examiner, but county coroner who's elected in most counties, or the county auditor, what difference does it make what their party affiliation is? They should be running their office in a nonpartisan way. And I just off the cuff in that interview mentioned that after this election, should I get reelected, I'm going to drop a bill that would make these positions nonpartisan. That has created a lot of interest, and I have good friends who are on both sides of this issue with me and against me, because there's merits to knowing party affiliation. But my concern is that someone who is overseeing elections can't even have the appearance of putting their finger on the scale to help their party or hurt the other party. And that's really what my comments come from more than anything. And certainly in a campaign that starts becoming very apparent. So it's more just this idea that this work needs to be nonpartisan. And I really think we have to have that robust discussion with the state legislature rather than the merits of it on the campaign trail or in the news media. So I'm really hoping that we can have that discussion in the 2021 session.
All right. So now a hardball. Last night, the president repeatedly said millions of unsolicited ballots are being sent out. What do you think he was trying to say? The interference is the inference. Oh my God. The inference is the potential source of fraud. Please help us understand.
You know, one of the things I'm most blessed with is my job does not require me to interpret what the president was trying to say. Thank God. Yes, I don't know really where he was going with that. I think that this delineation that he made earlier this year, that absentee ballots are very safe and secure and vote by mail ballots are very fraudulent. All I can figure is that there's a subtle nuance difference that I always share with groups. And I think it goes to political or worldview, depending on how you want to frame that. There's a subtle administrative difference. Absentee ballots are requested by a voter. Vote by mail ballots are sent to voters proactively by a government agency. And I think that really goes to the heart of where you get a visceral reaction about the difference, because I think we can maybe agree that Democrats would maybe be more comfortable with government than Republicans are, and Republicans tend to be very individual power, and the individual's ability to make things happen is more powerful and right. And I think that's why there's some uncomfortability with some of my peers on the right. But I don't try to anticipate why people like or dislike vote by mail elections. I always keep going back to our experience here in Washington State. Our experience here is that we do send a ballot to every eligible voter. And that's the important part of that sentence. We send it to every eligible voter. We don't just send it out in droves, millions of ballots to random households. They are going to eligible voters who have provided an identification, either their state driver's license, ID card, or last four of their social security number at the time of voter registration. So we have a high confidence level. They're real people who are residents of Washington State and are eligible to vote. Those ballots go out 18 days before Election Day. They're mailed to those households. And because we are a vote by mail state, we mail every single year. So we're doing a list maintenance cleanup at least once a year with those mailings in a general election. Further, we spend a lot of time trying to make sure our rolls are up to date by an organization that we helped found called I think I mentioned it to you the last time I was here, the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC. We compare our data, address data, and voter registration data with 30 other states. And the idea is to try to catch people moving from state to state, or maybe even within states, and trying to keep up with those changes, because 10% of our population moves every year. It is an ongoing, constant effort. We do not purge voters, by the way. We haven't purged voters since 1993, when the National Voter Registration Act was put into law. And so it's about keeping that maintenance of the list up. And we're ahead of the game over most states because we have updated addresses. That is a concern that many people have raised in other states, that their list may not be as up to date. And that might be where the president's remarks have a little bit of standing, because you may have some residential addresses or mailing addresses that are out of date. But that's why states use the National Change of Address system to keep those forwarding orders up to date, and to apply to those ballots to make sure we get them to voters. But again, it goes back to processes and controls, and states like ours have where you can track your ballot from, if you have informed delivery, you can see the ballot arriving in your mailbox, and once it gets to election officials, that you can see it tracked until it's ready to count. So. Okay.
What is on your list of improvements needed once the current election is certified?
The ongoing improvements are going to include cybersecurity, top of mind, and it will be going on indefinitely in the future. This is a race without a finish line. And or if you want to put it in more military terms, since we have a general in the room, or a retired general in the room, this is what the Russian government terms the forever war. They have changed the battlefield from a physical environment to a cyber environment, and they are attacking the free world with it. So cybersecurity is going to be something we are going to constantly have to continue providing and updating and staying ahead of the bad actors, because everything's in their favor. But we're going to fight hard to even the playing field and fight back. Beyond that, it is really about continuing to build out that consistency with how we apply laws and rules within our own state, and really trying to get that same consistency across the country, and working in a bipartisan manner in Congress and within states to get to that balance of accessibility and security that I think we have here in Washington, where we are providing really high levels of access with our voter registration and with our voting, but also having the secure controls on the back end with our vote WAS system and the policies and procedures we've built over decades. So I think it's just continuing that work and building out those options for voters.
That's pretty funny you should say what you did, because Jimmy was the one that asked the question. Way to sink into that one.
Yeah, we're on the same page.
All right, we've got like 5 minutes left for just a few more questions. Does any other state have the level of infrastructure that Washington has built to support our voting process?
Absolutely. In terms of infrastructure, I mean, remember, most of the public doesn't think about elections except once every 4 years when we have a presidential election. But election officials are working year-round every single year in those cycles. So the systems are different. You look at a state, for example, of like Tennessee, where 95% of their ballots are cast in a polling place in a normal election. And now they're going to be spinning up probably 40% of their ballots being cast by mail. They're going to see a 10-fold increase at least in that processing. So that's what they've been working on since probably April or May to build out that infrastructure. Is it as robust as ours? Probably not, but it's going to be ready. No one wants to fail their voters. Going back to that, who do we answer to question or comment I made earlier, the Secretary of State in Tennessee answers to his voters. So he's going to make sure that that is a well-run election. And I think, we have the 5 states that have done vote by mail. Historically, we're ready. In fact, the challenge for most of us is going to be the in-person voting and navigating that in a COVID environment. But the states, all of the states are working just as hard as we are.
All right. I'm worried the political influences of both parties on the voting process. What can we do as citizens to quell the untruths that the president and others convey every day?
Again, go back to your trusted sources, those governmental agencies like your county auditor's office, county elections division, Secretary of State's office, and get information and get your questions answered there. When you see something that is just patently untrue about mail-in voting, for example, and there's certainly a ton of that being circulated on social media, go to our frequently asked questions page here at the Secretary of State's office, go to your county elections page, take that data, make the link, and drive people to that. That's really the most powerful thing we can do. And I forgot to mention, we're partnering with our social media companies, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, Google. Those national partners are also in this conversation and the trusted info element. So if you see a posting, and I'll give an example, and it used to be a bad joke and now it's actually a real thing, where let's face it, everybody knows that Democrats vote on Tuesday and Republicans vote on Wednesday. And it was funny 20 years ago. It's not funny today, because those types of messages have been circulated in ways that look very legitimate on social media. Text your vote, text the vote. This was an actual one in 2016. Text your vote for Hillary to this number and you voted. And a lot of those messages were designed to suppress voting blocks. So if you see things like that are misinformation or worst case disinformation, contact the election department and let us know, because we are in direct contact with social media companies, and that disinformation in particular, they have policies in place now to deal with that and make sure that it's countered with the facts. or
All
taking.
Next, what should other, and I think you may have touched on this a little bit already, so forgive me, but what should other states adapting to vote by mail for this election do and not do to protect themselves from alleged fraud lawsuits?
Yes. Well, these are the conversations we've been having for the last 6 months with our counterparts. There's 3 areas that they need to focus on. The first one really is the control measures. So building out all of your checks and balances, your signature checking for your absentee ballots or your absentee ballot requests. How are you going to do that? How are you going to verify the people that are requesting it are legitimate eligible voters, checking your addresses, all of those control measures that that need to be in place. We've shared all of our policies and procedures on that front with our partners. So I think states have been doing that. The second area is managing your resources. And like I said, you know, we're way short on the amount of money that states really needed to beef up their system. So as we sit here now, 34 days before Election Day, what are your capacities? How many ballots do you anticipate getting by mail? How are you going to have enough throughput in your existing systems to be able to get through that in the statutory time frame you have to process those ballots? And states vary across the board based on their state laws. I think I mentioned in this briefing that we can start processing ballots 10 days before Election Day, which is checking your signature, opening those envelopes, getting them scanned, getting them ready. We can't count ballots until election night at 8 o'clock. There are many states that can't start that process until Election Day. This is going to be a huge problem if they get hundreds of thousands of ballots on Election Day and can't actually start processing them until right before their polls close. So capacity and managing that capacity, and finally being consistent in how you apply your rules. So for example, a voter intent. A voter circles the name of the candidate on their ballot rather than filling in the oval. If you put that ballot through a reader, the reader is going to count that as an undervote, meaning no one was selected in this race, but it is an actual vote for that candidate. So you have to have rules for how you duplicate that ballot and how you put it in the reader so that it is counted accurately, and document that with controls and chain of custody so there's no nefarious activity happening. So you need to have that in place, and you need to have it be the same. So that same ballot in Asotin County is counted the same way in Spokane and King and Thurston and every other state and every other county in the state. You have to have that across states across the country. So, you know, we have states that have hundreds of counties or hundreds of local jurisdictions. Having that consistency across the board is really important too. So controls, consistency, and resource management.
Kim, amazing presentation. Thank you so much. We've run out of time. I've run out of questions. That's not true. I ran out of the time to ask the questions, but you are always magnificent, and you're welcome back anytime. Best of luck in the next month.
And I do want to quickly interject my thanks as well, Kim. You're a dynamic speaker and a more than a force of nature. We might have to put you on the offensive. Have you granted any interviews with Russian state media lately?
Not that I know of.
Well, you did such a great job with charming Anderson Cooper. If members didn't see the video clip, you can find it online, I'm sure. But if you can charm Anderson Cooper on CNN as a Republican Washington State Secretary, you're doing a good job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.